We have one last thing, and I promise next week the usual shenanigans return, but there's been a lot going on behind the scenes this week.
Yes.
But Jim, we promised everyone the biography of Paul Heyman that aired on A&E. It was a 1-hour documentary, aired together with the Ted DiBiase documentary. What'd you think?
I said at the top of the program, for those of you listening in its entirety, boy, Paul's led a dramatic life. We're going to get into that. But the thing, you know better than anybody, people that have known both me and Paulie over our lifetimes, we've been called the most similar opposites. It's like Bruce said, well, Paul Heyman is a New York Cornette and Cornette's a hillbilly Heyman or whatever. But we've always been, with all of our similarities in age and the way that we got into business and things we did in the business, we've also always been polar opposites. The show opened. You're a big time New York man about town. What suit store was he shopping in there in the middle of Midtown Manhattan, or some fancy shoot shop?
It was a fancy shoot shop.
Yes.
I think it was Tom Cole.
Well, whatever. No, he was the ring boy.
Oh, what did he say? I forgot what he said. It was some designer that, it would look more like a zoot suit if he was skinny.
Well, he's in this luxurious fucking suit store somewhere, I guess, in Manhattan, and they're hauling out all this fancy stuff, and this shit costs a fortune, and he's reveling in it, in his suit. Oh, I got to have that one. We've made a deal here. And now think about this. 35 years ago, I was the one wearing a suit and a tie. I shaved before every TV and every house show in the 80s. I always had washed my hair. I always, even on the road, I got multiple shirts and pants and everything, so I'm not going out all wrinkly. And meanwhile, every piece of footage you see of him, he was a sweat-drenched, unshaven guy with a ponytail and dressed like a bum. Now...
Kenneth Cole.
There you go. No relation to the ring boy. But now Paul is wearing suits that cost more than the car that I'm driving, and I've had one professional haircut in about 5 years, and I wear a tie once a year to shoot Dark Side of the Ring. No matter what happens, we stay as far opposite in our lives in some ways as possible. But I know that Paul looked like a Brillo pad. Especially in the 90s ECW footage. I guess I probably would have too in the Smoky Mountain footage behind the scenes, had we shot any, because I was a free perspirer also. That's one similarity we have. But no, I wanted to see if Paul was going to sit down, like I said earlier, now that all is said and done and he's in the Hall of Fame and he's still doing things, but he's got the seniority, the elder status or whatever, that he could sit down and say, yeah, when I was a kid, I liked to go out and my mom made me a ham and cheese sandwich and I played kickball in the yard or whatever. No, he was always a goddamn enterprising social climber or whatever. And I say this with affection, but this program, it reinforced that he's been just completely obsessed with bullshitting his way ahead on shit since he was a fucking child, didn't it?
Well, I think he kind of said at the end what his mantra is, what his protocol is, which is not to worry about what other people think, just do what makes you happy.
Well, I'm not arguing with that.
Is finding ways to infiltrate. As a kid, you infiltrate wrestling. No, I'm serious. I mean, we've all done it. I mean, you, me, him, to different degrees. As a teenager, you infiltrate wrestling. And then, it's up to you. There are a lot of people that just sit around and wait for something to happen. And then there's people who actually try to make something happen. And I think Paul Heyman was never content with just sitting around waiting for a boss or whoever was above him to make something happen. He was always trying to stir his own drink.
I agree with the energy, and let me say the good stuff first. His mother has a fantastic story, a Holocaust survivor, and all that she went through. So we can't in any way make fun of any of that. And it was nice, the the respect that he gave her and the amount that he mentioned. And his father also was a personal injury attorney in the Bronx. I don't know if they're often spoken fondly of.
You should see some of the commercials on New York TV. Not that his dad's doing these commercials, but some of the personal injury attorneys in Manhattan or in the outer boroughs, some of them are really like, I will fight for every dollar you deserve. There's this one guy that does that. It's like a scary image. You're thinking like, I'm afraid of this guy.
It's like they're going to come knocking on the door instead of take you to court. It's like, hey, it's the Capolettis again.
And then as the other guy has to like tell you who he is because you don't believe him. It's like, I'm a pit bull and I'll be your pit bull. Nah, you don't really seem the type.
Well, we've got the Hammer. He used to be the heavy hitter, and then he changed to the Hammer. He's a big fat. Well, he's formerly fat. He's lost weight. He was huge. Nevertheless, and Paulie, back to his parents, talked about his father supporting him in whatever he wanted to do, but his mother would have been disappointed if he wasn't the replacement for God. Which he, explained well and etc.
That's growing up in a Jewish home. That's what that is.
Is that well? See, that's I missed out on this type of thing.
Yeah.
It was. But here's what I was saying, because we both, he and I, and you for that matter, were big fans when they were 10, 11, 12 years old, whatever. But it tickled me because at 15 years old, and he tells this story, I'm not making this up here. When he was 15 years old, he managed to figure out an idea where he knew in this small independent newspaper that Vince McMahon Sr. took Monsoon and a lot of, Arnold Scoland, whoever was in his inner circle at the time, to this particular steak place after the garden shows.
Ben Benson's.
Ben Benson, fine fella. I remember, actually Buzz Benson, the commentator from Paducah, was his brother. Did you know that?
I don't know Buzz Benson, no.
Well, then you missed out, because he was the Phil Golden's all-star wrestling commentator, and he did early ICW for the Poffos.
Huh. Well, let's buzz on back to Scarsdale.
Well, buzz back to the other Benson. So Paul calls the wrestling office, somehow gets a hold of Vince Sr. on a phone, tells him that he saw him at Buzz Benson's Steakhouse last week or a month ago or whatever, and he promised him a press pass. And Vince Sr. gives Paulie a present so he can go to Madison Square Garden, be ringside, and shoot pictures. Which, Madison Square Garden, think about how many photographers that there were at the time. Bill Apter was shooting for his magazines. George Napolitano, Frank Amato was all over that at that time.
And all of a sudden, a kid.
And then, but the thing is, nobody, because it was it was crowded there. You actually had to have a pass and all this other stuff, and nobody expected anybody to, concoct a deal. But just if he got Vince on the phone, he couldn't be honest up front. That was the thing. Do you know how that I got I didn't even get a press pass. They just said, yeah, you can go up at ringside and take pictures. Do you know how that transpired?
No.
Specifically?
No.
I took a picture from my front row seat with the new camera, 35 millimeter camera that my mom had got me for my birthday, but it was early, of Bill Dundee, and showed it to Teenie, Christine Jarrett, because I was proud of it. It came out so good. And she asked me, well, could you get some of those for the merchandise table? Yes, of course. And then, they said, well, you ought to get up closer where you can take better pictures. Okay. Same thing at the same age. At the same age, the same thing happened, except he fucking bullshitted Vince to get a press pass. And Teenie asked me if I could do that for her, because I'd already been around and done odd jobs for her and kept track of the TV, make sure they were playing the right local promos, etc., when they were having trouble with their TV station. But I didn't have to lie to anybody. Just do something and show somebody you can do it. You could accomplish the same thing.
Yeah, but it was two different things. You had to kind of do what you could to get in the door with WWF in New York City.
Well, anyway.
It wasn't like he could just, hey, here's a picture I took at ringside of the garden. He couldn't even get the ringside of the garden probably at that point.
Well, and here is see, this is, I wanted to know something more about Paul's personal life or younger life or whatever, like we usually do with these bios, because all the time we didn't talk about anytime we were working with each other. We didn't, oh, yeah, I used to like to go fishing with Aunt Lola when I was 12 or whatever. But he said he went to college and got an associate's degree in 3 semesters. Is that good? I'm not familiar with college.
Associate's degree is a 2-year degree. I have an associate's degree.
How long is 3 semesters?
What is a semester? Half the year? I don't fucking know. I guess that's a year and a half.
So he did it in a year and a half instead of 2 years. Well, there you, that's, but he never needed it because he was on the road to being a star. And we've talked about the Studio 54 deal and the picture you see of him, you know, giving Flair the Man of the Year award. And he did the thing with Bam Bam Bigelow where he got his first match there. And he was always promoting himself. And, you know, but now it's actually when you sit down and look at it, remember when he was the editor of the magazine? What were the magazines?
They were the magazines I own. I own the rights to them.
That's right. He got Ring Wrestling for a while, right?
He had, actually, I don't know. I got to double check that because remember, Keitzer's publications were all kind of merged into one, but they had, at that point, different names. So there was Ring Wrestling still. There was just Wrestling.
Yeah.
They became, so he was the editor for a few of those. And I actually have in my archive as part of the Wrestling News Archive, everything he sent in probably through like 88. Just tons and tons of stuff. And it's always, sometimes it's from Paul Heyman, but usually it's from Wrestling Press International.
Oh, I remember. Yes, he had cards printed up where Wrestling Press International presents Gala at Studio 54 and all that stuff. He was the International Wrestling Press.
And I've always wondered because there were various names like photo by this person, but it's clearly Heyman's handwriting. And you're wondering, is he just like making up other staff members that work for Wrestling WPI, for Wrestling Press International, and is it all him?
Well, yeah, well, see, that's what he was doing with, and I hate to expose anybody's business, but at this point, it's been almost 40 years. When the wrestling magazines blew up in the 80s because it was so popular, and obviously Apters had been around, and Napolitano did Superstars of Wrestling, and a few had been established, but there became like a plethora of different titles, Wrestling Eye and Wrestling Life and, you know, whatever, as well as that's when Norm Keitzer had got a national distribution and tried to consolidate the magazines. And what it ended up because, I mean, even London Publishing was not the Apter magazines. It wasn't a giant budget operation like Time or Newsweek. So basically, for some of the secondary magazines, a lot of times either a really devoted fan or a local photographer would end up being the editor because they could either do most of it or know, you know, the other photographers, they could get pictures cheap or whatever because there was no, but Paul, he wanted to do it because he was trying to, at that time, promote himself and his wrestling press and blah, 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 to get ends with the promoters because he was wanting to be in the business and want to be a manager. And he said, and I believe him, I wanted to be running the show and he wanted to be a booker from the start, but you can't just do that from scratch. And so he obviously wanted to manage. Who was it? The Motor City Madmen, the 2 muscle builders that he.
That's right.
He sent, because, and I'll tell you how we met in a second, but he sent pictures of himself with them to Florida. And he thought he was going to get, they may have taken them, but not him, or he went down there and came back real quick. I can't remember. But then he, you know, got the spot with Vern, who had no idea at that point really what was going on. He was just trying to keep programming on ESPN. But while he was editing the magazines, that's where I met Paul. When Crockett ran in late 1985, like October-ish, November, whatever, Crockett ran some small towns in New York. And we flew into New York City and stayed there, but and they were shitty houses that didn't draw. He was just testing the waters, and they were pretty fucking shallow. But Paul was there. But I have pictures that he took of me and superstar Billy Graham and Barry Darsow, Crusher Khrushchev, and a few of the other guys on the street, on the sidewalk outside our hotel that we stayed at, which was cool to have a picture of me and Billy Graham in New York City.
On the street, yeah.
But then he took me. I've told you this story, but it's been a long time. He took me to eat when we came back in February '86 to Crockett. It was at the Meadowlands. That was the first time that we'd worked the Meadowlands.
I have those
Midnight Rock and
pictures.
Roll for the World Tag Title. He took pictures of us in the locker room. He said, "Let me take you to the city to get something to eat, get some pizza." Right? I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I mean, we had started talking because we were both talkative and we were both photographers. And, you know, we had he had sent me some shit before we even met in person as part of the magazine deal. So I said, okay. And he had this little fucking sports car. And I'm not saying it was like a brand new Lamborghini, but it was some fancy foreign, older model sports car. And you know me, I'm shitting anyway, riding into, and he's driving around like Jesus Christ, like a race car driver. We come to the corner, stop at a red light. Some bum comes up and starts washing the fucking headlights, right? Wiping the headlights off. And I'm like, what, are we about to get fucking mugged here? What is the first time I've ever been to New York? And he said, no, he's a bum. He wants a quarter. And he hits his button and closes the goddamn headlights on the sports car, but he closed them on the guy's hand. And the guy said, I said, his hand, and he opens it up again. So I roll the window down and give the guy $1, or I'm trying to give him $1. And Paul hits the gas when the fucking light turns green and speeds off. Because I'm like, well, we accosted that poor guy. He's a bum. He wants a quarter. But I don't remember, the pizza was not that good, but we chatted quite a bit. So that's how we got to know each other, and that's how we stayed in touch on and off, by phone usually. Well, there was no really other way, no internet back then. And that's how, when he got the spot with Vern, with Randy and Dennis, and we saw Dennis was back, I was like, holy shit. Because that was what, somewhere around 9 months to almost a year after he had left, that they started for Vern.
Yeah.
So anyway, then basically the biography. So when Paul is in fucking the AWA, I talked to him on the phone a few times, and he's like, oh, he hated Vern Gagne and hated Vern's booking and hated the AWA shit, right? And part of it, I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, at least you got the job, a little more patience. But I knew that he wasn't happy. And of course, he'll tell the stories. I cussed Vern Gagne like a dog. I've told you some stories how Paul cusses people like dogs in those days after they'd already left the building and closed the door. But anyway, I knew that, he obviously was not wanting to live the rest of his life there. And that's when the biography it started. So this was his quote. So by the time I got a job in WCW, they already knew they were bringing on someone that's going to change the way we do things behind the scenes. Oh, goddamn. I'm not saying that Paul has not since then become very influential and successful and et cetera, et cetera. But right then, Dusty Rhodes had never fucking sat and watched Vern Gagne's TV since he worked for him in 1973. And I've told the story before, and people can go back and examine the clips for holes in my story. But basically, the story was this, on how Paul went to the WCW along with Dennis and Randy. Everybody knows that the Midnight was working with Tully and Arn when Tully and Arn quit and went to the WWF. September 10th, 1988 was their last night in Philly. And They may have been doing well at that time, but as I mentioned, the Midnight Express were fucked because now we had not switched completely babyface, but we had been put in the sympathetic position in the heel program with Tully and Arn. And now who have we got to work with that fits that fucking picture? Nobody. We had worked with Bobby and Tommy, the Fantastics, from March through August, and then started with Tully and Arn. But now we were back defending the World Tag Team title now against the Fantastics because we were caught unawares by this and there was no backup team. And the people were cheering us as half as well as they were cheering the Fantastics, but it had already been done and the heat was off of it. It wasn't drawing anymore, right? So what are we going to fucking do? So we needed somebody that we could work with, that we could capitalize on what had been done to make us more sympathetic figures. I didn't see anybody on the horizon that we were going to get fucking demonic levels of heat with. So I pitched to Dusty the idea of bringing in Paul, Dennis, and Randy, the original Midnight versus Midnight fucking angle and feud, which we did and started, and we've covered it plenty. And I called Paul. And I said, "Hey, do you want to come and can you come?" Yes. So as I pitched it to Dusty, and then I put them together on the phone. And Paul was doing the same thing for Dennis and Randy that I'd done for Dennis and Bobby. He was talking for them and handling their affairs, as they say. But there's no doubt that Paul developed into, a mover and shaker behind the scenes. But right then, there was no moving and no shaking. He was lucky to get to spot. And Dusty had said, "Hey, Dennis double-crossed us before he left us. So if you guys are cool with it, I'll bring him back." That was the only caveat. And we said, yes. And, and then Dusty was gone by the time Dennis was gone again. But there was nothing, it was to give us someone to work with, and not because Paul had established a reputation at that time as anybody but a pain in the ass, because that's what he was to Vern and Greg, was pain in the ass. But then when Dusty got fired by TBS because they took over same time, Crockett didn't like Randy Rose. He wanted to switch him out. Dennis wasn't happy about that. George Scott didn't like us. And he said, well, at least the other guys are new, because he'd never seen Paul or any of them either. And then, but they basically skipped ahead to the Dangerous Alliance without the first year and a half, where Flair fired Paul, and then he got in trouble for the expense account malarkey and figuring out a way to refund the plane tickets to his own credit card, blah, blah, blah. But then the Dangerous Alliance was very, very successful. And the China Club, Brian, have you ever been to the China Club, being a New Yorker?
I have not. Never been to the China Club.
He had pictures with Lawrence Taylor, Brooke Shields, Michael Jordan, Sylvester Stallone, David Lee Roth. Now, this is, I would have to think that because of his connections as a publicist and gadabout, that he could probably, and he loves to make friends with club owners and things like that. But those people were not all watching WCW in 1993 and say, I got to have a picture with that guy. He's got more pictures with celebrities than you could have made me make trips to the China Club. But anyway, so then Watts came in and he wasn't going to put up with Paul's shit, and because he had conned Kip Fry into paying him a fortune in a company that was losing millions of dollars. So that's when, help me out with this, being a New York radio expert, having listened to it. Paul said that he signed with the William Morris Agency, and the first gig that he got is to go head-to-head with Howard Stern on the radio in 1992.
Yeah, he said this before. I've always questioned it because, Howard Stern was killing everyone in the mornings in New York, and there was a lot of competition. It wasn't like he was the only show out there. He was beating the strongest competition in the country. You had Imus still on FAN. You had Pettengill and Scott Shannon on PLJ. You had the Morning Zoo on Z100, let alone everything happening on Hot 97 and everywhere else. So it was a really strong competitive market. The idea that Paul Heyman at that point in his life, and we've heard him do enough radio on different radio shows, he was wackier then and more irreverent and more willing to say obnoxious things to get a reaction then than he is now. That on the radio in 92 or 93 against Howard Stern, I don't think he would have stood a chance. And I think he knows that because he's a Howard fan, or he was, back then, like all of us. So it's a story that maybe he was going to get a radio show, but the idea he was going to compete with Howard Stern is laughable just because, again, I don't even know if he was going to be able to compete with Imus at that point in 1993. It's kind of a ridiculous thing. What station was it? And then also, to end that story, he was going to do that until his best friend, Eddie Gilbert's unnamed, his best friend...
I swear to God, also, do you notice that? He was, my best friend, and never named him.
Yeah, my best friend offered me a job with ECW to help with creative. ECW was running, was it once a month at that point? Twice a month? Like, they weren't doing much, so it wouldn't have interfered with this radio gig that he gave up to do that, according to him in his own words.
Well, and also he said, like the line in, Goodfellas, Godfather, one of them gangster movies, I thought I was out and they pulled me back in. At the same time, or no, before that, right? When he went to help, or which came first, the chicken or the egg here? He went to help Eddie when Eddie started booking ECW, when it was Eastern Championship Wrestling, because he had also worked a little bit before with Eddie and Continental. But he was also working with Jim Crockett when Jim Crockett, in late 93, he was living in Dallas, but his 5-year non-compete was up, and Crockett was trying to restart the wrestling network. Remember that?
Right. If you listen to anything Paul Heyman was saying in early 93, what he was doing was working with Jim Crockett, working with... Remember, when he took over the book from Eddie Gilbert and ECW in September of 93, he announced to the locker room, this is Jim Crockett's show now. I mean, he thought NWA Eastern Championship Wrestling was going to be a part of Jim Crockett's thing, and he was going to be the right-hand man. And as soon as he realized Jim Crockett doesn't have a chance, he pivoted. And it was the right move, by the way. But he was doing that. He was doing ECW, but also he was trying to get something off the ground. Was it the
with
World
the
Wrestling?
Savoldies?
No, not that. It was, I forget if it was that was 1990 you're thinking of. I forget if it was the World Wrestling Network or what it was, but he was shooting. He did 2 tapings, one in Texas in early 93, and then at the Manhattan Center, I think early 94, in high definition. No one had even heard of it at that point around wrestling. He was already talking about trying to shoot wrestling in high definition.
Yeah, well,
he did a taping in Texas, and it was like Jake Roberts versus, I think, Bob Orton, and it was the Kimono Dragons, which were Dean Malenko and Ted Petty, Rocco Rock under masks.
Well, that was the Crockett deal, because that's where Jimmy was living in Dallas. But the first TV that they did, I don't even know if Paul was there, but the first one Crockett did was in Chattanooga. You remember that?
Right, but that's separate. That's a separate thing altogether. There was another thing Heyman was doing in HD that had nothing to do with Crockett.
Okay, I thought the Dallas one did.
No, I don't even know if it was Dallas. I don't know if the Texas show he did that was a taping was in Dallas. I don't remember that.
Well, in Chattanooga, Crockett did that one because he was working with Ronnie West, said he could promise him he could draw him a house. And then they realized they didn't have a ring. I had to send the ring down from Knoxville. And then Crockett got mad. And yes, Paul Lee was involved in that at that time, because Crockett got mad at the Rock and Roll Express because they wouldn't commit to his next dates, which were against some of my shows. And he was mad. They say, well, we're working 15 times a month there. You're running once a month right now. We can't, And then he moved to Dallas. But point is, Paul was working with Crockett. He thought that was going to be NWA ECW, and then whatever happened with Eddie, he was right there to help Todd Gordon through that moment of stress.
Eddie self-destructed. There was nothing anyone could have done. Eddie decided to do things that made him unemployable in Todd Gordon's eyes, and Heyman, as always, ambitious, looking for an opportunity. He wasn't going to let that ruin his chance. And he took that opportunity, really ran with it like no one else could have.
But even then, okay, maybe he didn't want to take a side. Paul didn't want to take a side trip into Eddie Gilbert. But when he said, my best friend asked me to take over creative for ECW and start with a blank piece of paper, then I thought he was talking about Todd Gordon being his best friend because Eddie asked him to be his assistant booker.
Yeah, actually,
he didn't say come in here and take my job away from me.
Well, that's true. Actually, that's very, very true. I forgot about that. The way he phrased that. Yeah, Eddie asked him to come work there, and he was managing on TV, the Dangerous Alliance in ECW, and then he replaced Eddie as booker. So again, it's a revisionist history, I guess.
And remember, and he would also when I walked out of WCW, he'd call me every month. Hey, you got them right where you want them now. They'll give you anything to come back. I'm not coming back, Paul. I don't like these people. Don't want to work for them anymore. Oh, they'll give you anything. He was checking to make sure I wasn't coming back. He almost walked me to the door a couple times when I'd been pissed off before. I'd be these motherfuckers. He'd put his arm around me. You're right. They're doing this and that. It's almost like he's walking me toward the door. Anyway. And I got a kick out of all of the veterans like Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. They don't want to knock Paul. And the Paul they work with now is brilliant. And he didn't owe him any money, like he owed other people in the 90s or whatever. But they struggle to find good ways to not say bad things about ECW itself. Like, well, nobody else was doing it. Because if you asked them, which I've heard them comment on it in real time as it was going on. What the fuck, those fucking outlaw goofs, right? So that's it revisionist, the way things have all worked out. They have to kind of say good things about ECW because the promotions they work for now still do shit like that, which is why we can't get rid of it. And it pretty much has stagnated the business for 20 years. But I like Paul. I admire his talent. I've known for 35 years that he's full of shit. The old saying that I had, Paulie would rather climb a tree and tell a lie than stand on the ground and tell the truth. But I think he's a phenomenal talent now, and I think he's incredibly creative, and what a tremendous booker and manipulator he has been. But the glorification and the nostalgia for ECW, I don't get, because not only has it stuck us with the furniture, but they lost $8 million. $4 million, according to Paul, came from his parents. So and he went personally bankrupt. I was shitting myself when we owed $110,000 in Smoky Mountain. I was like, oh, fuck. I can't imagine the goddamn, the gall or the stress or the nerve or whatever the fuck. To be $8 million? Christ on a cracker. Have you ever owed anybody $8 million?
No, I'm not really big on owing people money. That's never been my thing.
But anyway, otherwise than that, I got to make mention, he said he became a father because of 9/11. And see, that's what I'm saying. Paul's life is so dramatic. He's telling this like, and then they pulled me back in or whatever. Tell me what you think. Was there a level of realism to this, or is he again being Paul Heyman, the public Paul Heyman, and being a little overly dramatic about everything?
Well, I think I said it to you recently. I forget if it was the ECW biography or what it was, but everything with him publicly in front of a camera is a pitch. He's selling himself. He's selling a story. He's selling a way to think. That's not the same guy that you'll talk to if you sit in a room with him. I've sat in a room with him, by the way.
Yeah. I've dropped elbows on him. You ought to hurt him then. Oof.
With that said, the story of his mother, I can relate to that completely. I had someone very, very close to me who survived 2 of the concentration camps. And, when you hear the story, it changes you, especially if you are Jewish, like I am, like Paul Heyman is. So I can understand how that's a driving factor in his life and in his way of thinking. And, I didn't grow up with a Holocaust survivor mom. I could understand how that would affect his way of thinking, like he explained. And, she wanted nothing but the best for her son. And, it seems that he right now is having his best life, closing in on 60, more acclaim than he's ever had before. You would have to think none of the stresses or financial issues, on a corporate level that affected him before. He's got kids that seem well adjusted that he loves. It seems like he's in the best place he's in. And, the story about Brock Lesnar telling Vince, give him whatever he wants, make him an offer he can't refuse.
Yeah.
That's it. What do you think of the whole relationship with him and Brock?
Paul was an intricate part of Brock because Brock, as we've seen, doesn't need to be out there doing soliloquies. Man, a few words, a lot of action. Paul was perfect for that. Even though Brock is an allegedly college-educated person, you don't want the beast to be out there laying all of it down. You want the hype man, you want the manager, and he's perfect because he's the best. And Brock was, in large part, is the biggest box office attraction per match or whatever because of the work that Paul put into him, developing that and getting it over. And but that again, that's the only thing. And I know about the kids but the thing is, it was so matter of fact the way he said it. Well, it was my 36th birthday. I wanted my parents to know my kids, so he just had kids. But the only time he mentioned, he confided in Brock that his girlfriend was pregnant, and that's the only time that you ever heard a goddamn woman mentioned. His girlfriend didn't have a name. He's got 2 kids, but they apparently didn't get married. Nothing wrong with that. Are they still together? Nothing even wrong with that, but not ever mentioned again, and no fucking picture of the family or whatever on Biography. I'm thinking he either called Babies R Us or it's one of those Michael Jackson fucking receptionist deals. Well, how do you just get babies because you want babies?
Well, according to Paul Heyman, he had a girlfriend and they decided to have unprotected sex in the name of having a baby a couple of times.
It just seemed like it was an incredible easy thing to happen, but she got no more credit through the rest of the fucking thing. But anyway, I'm thinking, does everything have to be so deep that he has to have kids so he can tell the story? Can he just like kids? Can he just say, and I used to go fishing, or anything. He's goddamn, he's been an energetic sumbitch all his life. And then we still don't know what the fucking ad agency he started really does or did, but otherwise, and they did. Was it Vince that fired him or was it Stephanie? I thought Stephanie fired him, but he said he and Vince couldn't coexist because that way it looks at least like he got fired by the boss.
Yeah, I don't remember timeline wise what because he's been sent home a few times, so I don't remember exactly.
Well, sometimes you can be sent home without being fired, and other times it lasts a while. I think his lasted about 6 years or whatever. But and that's another thing is, Paul, for a person who loved wrestling as much as he did, he never really did the reunions or the fan fests or little, indie shows for his friends that may be promoters or whatever, just to do it. He just said, fuck it, I'm going to go away for a while. I guess I kind of understand now, but it wasn't as bad then as it is now.
Hey, he's never been watered down. There's never been some bullshit indie show with Paul Heyman making an appearance. And you know what? If you don't have to do those autograph shows, why do them?
Because some of them were fun. From experience.
Maybe he didn't think those things were fun. Maybe he was afraid Tommy Dreamer would shoot him. I really don't know.
Maybe he's going to run into somebody that would hit him over the head. People think I have heat with the boys. I didn't know anybody any money. But anyway, overall, I think, like you said, he's the best now that he's been. And maybe it's that he's this much older and he's calmed down enough because he doesn't have the wind to be too fucking frantic as he used to be. And he's found that groove where he's like Elton John. He sings different now that his voice changed, but he can still do the songs.
Well, that's the Paul Heyman.
Paulie and the Jets. Paulie.
What'd you think of the footage of Paul Heyman booking a rental car or parking for Roman Reigns or whatever? His work outside of the ring where he is kind of doing what people heard you may have done for the Midnight Express, or I don't think Ellering did everything for the Road Warriors, but...
No, fuck no. Ellering did more for the Road Warriors than me or Paul, either one have ever done for anybody. He was actually managing their money.
Right, but in terms of booking cars and stuff, did he do that too?
Yes.
Yeah?
They were, yes. That's... Paul Ellering, for a number of years, was the highest paid manager and one of the highest paid wrestlers in the business. So he was going to do all the things that he was responsible for doing because he had a wonderful spot.
Well, what do you think of the footage of Heyman doing that stuff now?
I wouldn't want to do it now just because you have to do it. He's got that phone in his fucking hand. He loves the fucking phone. It's not ever been a gimmick. He loves that thing because he loves to talk to people. I'd hate to do it now because you have to do all that goddamn online shit. But no, before the Great American Bash 1988, I had a spiral notebook. And every day I had mine in the Midnight's hotel, rental car, confirmation numbers, fucking route to take to the next town. And we would just buzz out of the airport in a Hertz Gold car after, 10 minutes when all the guys were standing on the fucking curb trying to find a ride in a taxi somewhere. So I can identify, yeah. But you got to keep the machine going. You got to keep the talent on the road. Or in the car, or in the air, or somewhere.